Welcome to Break Everything. Your host, Lisa L. Levy, will guide you through critical thought conversations and a journey of directed disruption that makes a difference. Experience bold conversations with industry leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Break Everything. Today, I'm taking a little bit of guidance from some of our viewers and listeners who said, Lisa, sometimes it's a little scary talking about being disruptive or even really wanting to try to be disruptive because how we represent ourselves has a long-term impact on our career. And I agree, and I couldn't agree more. I like being a little bit disruptive, but not everybody is as comfortable as they can be in that space, and nor should everybody play as overtly as I might. So for today's conversation, I've invited Lisa Rangel to speak with us. She is the CEO of Chameleon Resumes, and she is here to help us understand how to showcase our desires to lead transformation, how if we are a little bit disruptive, how we present that and package it in the most professional and impactful way. It's a slightly different topic for us, but I think that it's one that's really important for our audience to understand how to showcase the power of being disruptive. Lisa, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Lisa. I'm really excited for our chat today.
Great. So the audience is used to the fact that I really don't do big bio reads at the beginning of the shows because it's so much more interesting and impactful if you tell us your story. So would you please take a few minutes and introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you do, why you do it?
Absolutely. Happy to do it. I'm Lisa Rangel, CEO and founder of Chameleon Resumes and Job Landing Academy. I work primarily with executives. Although we're talking about healthcare here today, I work with individuals at the senior level, the executive level, in all different industries, of which healthcare is one. And I was a recruiter for 13 years, an executive recruiter for 13 years prior to starting my company in 2009. And my team and I all come from either human resources or corporate recruiting or executive search backgrounds. And we work with executives in not only writing their documents, their career documents, we also help them execute the search, training them on exactly what to do to execute the search. So you're not dependent on third-party recruiters calling you or waiting for that perfect job to arise, on job boards. And frankly, I think that's a great topic for your audience because, to say we're disruptive or we're transformational or we're unique and then wait for people to call or wait for something to arise in job boards doesn't really, from an action standpoint, align with the words. So it's all about going after what you want and being strategic. And that's exactly what we show people how to do.
That's fabulous. And with the history of your company, you started in 2009, right? That's a disruptive date to start a business.
Good insight. Yes, it's true. I found myself laid off in 2009 as a recruiter, and I was always writing resumes for the job seekers that I would work with as a recruiter. And when I found myself not working in 2009, I was actually able to land some consulting work and stay working, but I was really burnt out on recruiting at the time. And I always loved writing resumes for individuals. And it just sort of took off then as a business. For probably the first couple of years, I called it my productive unemployment. But then I realized I can make this a genuine, outright business. And so that's what I structured over the following 2-3 years to evolve into a business.
Yeah. And there's a history, I'll share, right? Lcubed was formed in 2009 also because I had a moment of just had it up to here with the things that were going on in the world around me in the business world, right? But during economic downturns, there's an opportunity for innovation.
Absolutely.
For being disruptive, whether we did it intentionally to be disruptive, probably not so much at that moment in time, but what you've built over 13 years is significant. And so congratulations, right?
Oh,
you stood the test of time.
Very kind of you to say, and back at you.
So we're talking a little bit more, focused on the healthcare sector. With the Great Resignation, with coming out of the pandemic, with a workforce that is tired, that is burnt out, what is the best part of your role working with your clients at this stage of what's happening in the industry?
One of the greatest joys that I have and my team have is seeing someone who has been, previously either frustrated, mentally defeated, downtrodden, and seeing them have that aha moment of realizing that they can be happy, pivoting in a different way that maybe they didn't think of before, or maybe it is a way they've always suspected they could do but never had the confidence to do, and getting them to see how they can pivot into that direction is always just extremely rewarding. It really never gets old, and that to me is one of the greatest joys. It's a tough time, and someone helped me, through it. A lot of people actually helped me through it in 2008 and 9 from when I was going through that downturn. I went through the downturn as a New York City staffing office manager in 2001. And so, I've been through that downturn as well. So I think that when people collectively pick you up, at least for me, I in turn want to essentially pay it forward and return the favor, not necessarily maybe directly as an opportunity that's available, but just universally. And so I just like seeing people being able to have the pivots and the support that I have had. And that's the biggest joy to me.
It's fantastic. When I use the language disruptive, some people are very uncomfortable with that word. They see that there may be some negativity towards it. I try to define it as challenging the status quo to make a positive impact. And I see it as a very positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for a person who's looking at a career change, looking at updating their executive profile, their resume, things that they might be wanting to pivot and go in a slightly different direction, what are some of the tactics that you use with your team to help them convey that they're disruptive or transformational, or that they have that ability to make that positive impact?
What I think is interesting is when someone is disruptive, either or transformational or both in their industry, and documenting it in such a way, it's sometimes unnatural, right? Because we do what we do, and we don't think of writing it down, right? Or recording it in some way, or promoting it, even at the next level. And what we've been doing all along, although it's become a lot more pronounced of tactics to do in the during and post COVID period, is, document how you have created leaders who have created leaders, right? So it's not about only what you have done as a leader, but how you have mentored, sponsored, identified, attracted other, formidable talent, and then in turn help them create, their lineage essentially and their legacy. That typically is some evidence of that you are, one that's disruptive. There is this feeling of disruption, being negative or jarring, but I honestly view kindness and empathy as disruptive, because business has always been so, cold and clinical in past decades, right? So if you can also outline how you have retained staff, even compassionately let them go, right? That's all part of sometimes a normal business cycle, but it can be done compassionately. It can be done, with kindness, with purpose. And I'm a Cornell hotel grad, and I find that now in healthcare, there's this weave in the last decade, but mostly over the last few years, it's ramped up even more, where, that end user experience and bleeding in the hospitality perspective into healthcare is now being viewed as disruptive, right? But that's all revolved around kindness, and that's all about caring. So I think that it doesn't have to be negative. I believe that most people have that disruptive element within them. They're either not recognizing it as so, and they're not documenting it as so. But when you really sit down with them and pull it out of them, the story that is, it's like, they're like, wow, yeah, I guess that is pretty wild, or I guess that is pretty different, or that was pretty amazing for the time that I did it in. And so it's getting people to reframe what they have been viewed as, either not the norm or an alternative path, and really embracing it and owning it, so it can become normalized.
I love that you see the connection, right? And the tie from what, we now talk about in healthcare as the patient experience, which
Exactly.
all of this absolutely ties back to hospitality, the customer experience, because hospitality as an industry set the standard, and everybody else, Disney likes to take a lot of credit for it, and I guess that is hospitality entertainment industry, but it's growing, and it is living and breathing inside of every industry. The idea of
Right.
being customer centric is a game changer for any business. And I love talking about that, right? Put your customer at the center of your universe, and you can do anything.
Absolutely.
What you were describing that's so impactful, I think, is right. We're talking about writing a resume, or a professional bio profile,
Right, or LinkedIn profile, right?
or a LinkedIn profile, and you're describing your clients taking and explaining the journey that their employees or their customers were on, that it's all about the story. And I love that, even though we're boiling it down to words on a page, whether, it's still about that story and understanding it and helping them understand, because we've learned that the story is what makes the emotional connection, and that's what leads people to taking action. In this case, offering a job or extending a new opportunity to somebody. I thank you for
Or
sharing
having
it.
just a conversation to explore to see if it is the right thing. It doesn't often have to be automatically to the offer or the new or the new role, but just having conversations like these documents, especially like a LinkedIn profile, can foster someone just to reach out, learn from you, so they can apply it to their organization. So, and that's the spirit of networking. And it's, if people are interested in if you've piqued their interest, then they're going to be more likely to reach out, and you've given them some fodder in which they can use to reach out in a meaningful way. And that will make you want to respond as well, because you've seen that they've taken the time to read something. They maybe included it in their note to you. And so when you offer more about you in a human way, then you typically get that back too.
Offering it more about you in a human way. Also language, right? Vulnerability, words that we didn't use prior to a pandemic to position ourselves, right? We wanted to be credible. We wanted to be professional. We wanted to be things, but to actually put ourselves out there and be human is new.
Well,
in working.
Interesting that, if you don't mind me interrupting, I mean, interesting that you mentioned vulnerability and then say we didn't do it because we wanted to be credible. And the irony is, I think, when I call it diplomatically vulnerable, right? Like we can't use it as therapy, right? It's not a matter of oversharing. But I think when we are, whether it's on interviews, for jobs or meetings that we're having to explore, if it's a right merge, or if we're diplomatically vulnerable, that I think the person, all things being equal, when you're interviewing a series of candidates competitively, I personally believe that the person who is diplomatically vulnerable, with all other things being equal, will tend to win, because it's also subliminally sending a message of how you're going to interact with that potential employer or potential business partner when things go wrong, or you need to have a heart-to-heart conversation. If you're already doing this as a demonstration, it's going to subliminally send a vibe that you're going to do this in a few other different scenarios that might come up, which are often difficult conversations. So I think it's important to be diplomatically vulnerable as a lead, because then others may follow.
Do you see trends or challenges for women to be diplomatically vulnerable when they're putting together their resumes and their profiles? Because I know I came up in a time, right, that would have felt weak. Right. And as you're coaching people through actually representing on those professional levels, on the bios, on the resumes, on the profiles to actually be truly authentic. Was that an obstacle? Was that a challenge for people?
It absolutely is. I think it's always going to be, right? It's like, how much do I say? How much do I not say? Like, it's that type of thing. But I think what we've learned, if we haven't learned it through COVID, I think it's going to be hard to learn, frankly, that, we have lives outside of work, right? We have, 20, 30, 40 years ago, work, your personal life and your business life could be and were very compartmentalized. And now they're literally concurrently going at the same time all the time, right? So we need, the work structure to change in order to live and work successfully. And I think when we can share what we're going through at home, we're going to be able to work better. It's just the way, there's studies on it. I don't have them at hand, but like I've been working from home since 2009, as is my team. So like, I know it works, so, granted, we're a small company, but it's very doable. And so it's not going to be the culture for it's not going to be the right culture for every organization. But I think that you're only able to tailor needs if you know what they are. And in order to know what they are, people have to be willing to safely share them, which I don't say that in a way that is taking that for granted, because if people don't feel safe, they're not going to share. But and that to me is part of being disruptive and transformational, is allowing for that safety to exist so people can share what they need. And then we develop the structure around it that then in turn makes the employees' experience better, which ultimately in turn serves the customer better. So to me, it's just all intertwined. And those are the stories that need to be put on either a document, either electronically, it's all electronic nowadays, but either a resume or a profile or a bio, and in your verbal stories, so whether it's a merger and acquisition type meeting, or it's an interview for a leadership role, it's being able to describe how you've done all that, how you've pivoted when unexpected happened. I forget the phrase you used earlier, but I always like to say there's ethical opportunity in chaos, right? So, whenever, things go up, there's opportunity, and there's scariness. When things go down, there's opportunity and there's scariness. Like, how do you capitalize on that ethically, of course, right? So like, and those are the stories that need to be told, and we've been telling them, all along, but they've definitely become more prominent in the way people set themselves apart amongst competitors, since COVID.
So let's follow this a little bit further. So if we're doing the good things and we're trying to make the difference, we're being disruptive, we're being transformational, and as we're practicing getting better about representing that and sharing it, what's that flip side? What are those missteps that people often make when trying to tell those stories, but falling short in getting that story out correctly?
I think mistakes or missteps in putting out your stories or your branding can happen when you're focused on you and what you look like to the public versus like just focus on your employees and your customers. When you focus on what you're doing for people, and not telling the story about what you're doing for people. I know that sounds somewhat silly of a nuance, but it's a true thing, right? Like, the missteps are when you're looking for those social media moments, right? Or those bio moments. But when you just do what you do and the story comes out in and of itself and you speak to it objectively, people are going to be impacted by the fact. When you add subjectivity to it, and superlatives, and you make it about you, then that whole humble brag effect, right? Like then that becomes that's when it becomes like icky and a little bit of a misstep. Another mistake is feeling like what you're doing is different, but when you really look at the landscape, it's not. And again, we don't need to be disruptive every day, right? Like that's just not that's not a sustainable model. But I think if sometimes we get a little full of ourselves and we tend to think everything we're doing is disruptive. When you start telling, ordinary stories, but in an in a bit of an exaggerated way, it's filled with self-importance, and that will be viewed as a misstep. So I think it's really it's staying committed to the story of how it's affecting others and what you're doing is affecting others, and less about what it looks like for you. The more contrived it feels, the more wrong it is, right? So a brand is not something you create. A brand is what you do that people know you for. So it's really focused on your actions and what people come to in your reputation versus like what you think of yourself.
And I think that's a really important point. And we hear brand, and branding is everywhere, right? It's a very popular idea. And the fact that it is who you are, how you show up, right? That it is what you do, and it isn't something that is about a quirky little graphic
Right.
that somebody created to represent you, is a really important distinction. And I think it's important that we all remember, right? Those are the things. Our brand is our reputation. And that is so much more meaningful than an Instagram meme.
Right.
What that can be. We are coming out of the pandemic. We are coming into a rocky economy. We have all sorts of tumultuousness around us. From your perspective, what are the opportunities that you see for people who are looking for career changes or job changes? We have people who are going through, there are layoffs that are happening again. What are some of the opportunities for people who are looking for a new role or a new opportunity right here in the here and now?
I'm a big advocate of the SWOT analysis, for like anything and everything in my life, and, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think doing an inventory, of what you bring to the table, what's needed, where it could be needed is definitely a good place to start. And even before that, I would advocate doing a list. I suspect most people watching this in your audience are experienced. They probably have more than 15 to 20 years of experience typically. But this exercise is for anyone. But I think the longer your resume or profile may be, this will be more helpful. Really do a list of what you don't want to do anymore. And even if you're great at it, even if you've done it a long time, even if that makes up a lot of your stories of your achievements, if you genuinely don't want to do something anymore, maybe start to consider diminishing its importance on your branding, or even removing it if that's doable, and focus on what you want to do. And then when you're putting out what you want to do and continue doing versus what you don't want to do anymore, you're going to start attracting what you want to do, versus if you have what you don't want to do listed on your branding, it's, guess what, you're going to get calls for what you don't want to do. So I think sometimes we get attached to these pieces of information that we've carried for so long, and that removing them seems odd, but that's usually a good start. And then truly make a list of what you want to continue doing where it's needed, and start looking for people on LinkedIn that look for people in second, third degree connections and groups. Reach out to people directly. Don't wait for third-party recruiters to call you. Don't wait for job postings to arise. Like, just start talking to people where you want to be. And just, I honestly believe the breadcrumbs will be found when you just start putting yourself out there.
Okay. And building on that, from the flip side, what are opportunities, right? Our world is bigger. We are more connected. What does that mean from an opportunistic perspective for people who are looking to make a change?
We've never had more information readily available at our fingertips in so many different ways, like, than ever before, right? So every once in a while, I'll get experienced people who will say to me, and this is a true quote from a former client, how am I supposed to network when my network is, retired or past, or, and like, I'm not laughing. It's just kind of a funny statement to make. And this person was serious. And that happens with career changers. Well, how am I supposed to network if I'm leaving the industry and I don't know anybody in that new industry? And my statement to you is, people, right? Everyone in your industry knows someone that could lead you to someone, if not directly, to somebody in your new industry. If you're looking to move from Dallas to New York or New York to Dallas, I bet you everyone in Dallas knows somebody in New York and vice versa. If you're looking to get into healthcare or leave healthcare, you know people who can get you in or leave, or who've made that change, and talk to them how they did it, what they would, so between LinkedIn, internet research, we have access to contact almost anybody at any point. Some are going to be harder to find than others, but we absolutely have the ability to find and reach out to people. And so we have to take the proactive stance of reaching out to people, to learn, to be inquisitive, to be curious. And in doing that path, that's where we find the answers. We may not know it when we start, but we're going to know it when we find it. But the only way we're going to be able to find it and know that we found it is by starting that journey. And that in and of itself is different than what most people do, because most people, we can't say that we're different and then look for a job the same way everybody else looks. Our actions have to align with the words. You can't just throw around words like disruptive and transformative and then not act in a disruptive or transformative way in the way you do your search. So, how you do the search is also a way of conveying how you will be on the job. So if you're saying in your marketing language somewhere that you are disruptive and transformative, you better do it differently and back it up.
Absolutely. Right. Put your actions where your mouth is.
Money where your mouth is, right?
Money where your mouth is. And show up the way, the way that you want to be seen. And sometimes it's a little,
your brand is what you do, not what you say, right? So that's by doing it, that's in and of itself will come across disruptive, even if you never use the word.
Right. And, using the word is not necessary. Right. I just enjoy it because it's fun.
Oh, absolutely. Words are fun. I'm a writer.
Just a little bit of fun. Lisa, the last question I ask every one of my guests is, if I were to give you a magic wand, it removes all constraints of time, money, any other constraints that you can think of. What would you do for job seekers to make the world a better place? How would you use that magic wand?
And it has almost nothing to do with like what I do day to day for certain clients. But, I think there's such a problem with underemployment and unemployment in so many populations. And yet there are so many companies that need talent. And if there's a way of educating companies on how to make their jobs fillable and then bringing candidates up to speed on the skills they need to fill those jobs, and somehow if there can be a meeting in the middle, that would be, because I honestly think that if there can be a way of getting those individuals employed in a meaningful, productive way for those companies, that's really, I think, the crux of a lot of problems can be fixed if people have meaningful work that pays them somewhat decently.
I think that is an absolutely beautiful sentiment. Today's conversation, a little different than our normal conversation, but very impactful, because changing roles happens everywhere. And in the healthcare industry right now, it is in great flux. So Lisa, I really, truly appreciate your time and your perspective and what you've shared with the audience today. I hope that people think about being disruptive in a slightly different way than they may have before. And that concludes today's episode of Break Everything in Healthcare.
You have just experienced Break Everything with Lisa L. Levy. Critical conversations on directed disruption that makes a difference.